Hooah. That's the last thing I expected. The slap knocked me back, and my ears were ringing. What the heck was that? I yelled. Okay, hold on, I need to rewind a few weeks and explain some stuff, or this is going to make zero sense. I came in from the garage and walked into the kitchen just after 4 p.m., my usual quitting time. My company has some clients in the UK, so I start work at 7 a.m. every day to get some overlap time with them. Took some getting used to, but I actually like it now. As I walked into the kitchen, I instinctively glanced at our message board, but the only thing written on it was, working late. Ugh, solo dinner again tonight. When Fiona and I first got married and lived in that tiny apartment, we hung a chalkboard on the kitchen wall as a way to coordinate our schedules. And when we bought this house, we kept the tradition going. At first, we'd leave each other cheesy, embarrassing little love notes. I remember one time I left her a note that said, "Can't wait to get home from work. Bunny, I've missed you." When I got home that afternoon, she'd written back, "I missed you more, and don't call me Bunny." We met at a little bakery and I started calling her Bunny ever since. Now that she's established, she doesn't want people knowing my pet name for her, but it's hard for me to break the habit. Yeah, I know the notes and pet names sound super cheesy, but they meant a lot to me, especially now that the cheese seems to have melted right out of our relationship. These days, I'm lucky if I find a short note telling me what she's up to and when she expects to be home. Or, like today, just working late. I'm not naive. I know even the shiniest gems lose their luster over time, and routine and familiarity can dim the sparkle of new love. But over the past year, it seems like it's been more than just familiarity that's changed our relationship. It's not just that we don't leave each other love notes anymore. Things have gotten to the point where we hardly ever spend any time together. My work schedule, of course, is part of the problem. On weekdays, I leave the office before she even gets out of bed. But her job has made things worse. See, Fiona's a real estate agent, and while her office has regular hours, she's basically on call for any seller or buyer. Want to make an offer on a house at 9 p.m. Fiona will drive to your house to help you with the paperwork. Trying to sell your house. Fiona will set up an open house that'll keep her busy all Saturday or Sunday afternoon. You get the picture. But that's not even half of it. 2 years ago, Fiona got the bright idea to run for city council in our district. I did my best to talk her out of it, but her friends and colleagues kept egging her on. I wasn't too worried at the time because our longtime councilman had won by 2/3 of the vote in the last election. But halfway through the campaign, his wife had a stroke, and he dropped out of the race to take care of her. Before I knew it, my wife had won a seat on the city council. Of course, that led to a whole new level of responsibility for her. It's not just the monthly council meetings. Fiona's also constantly meeting with constituents, serving on task forces, and doing whatever else elected officials do. When I stood on the podium at the hotel with her on election night when she got re-elected, I was so proud of her and her success. Seeing how happy she was with her new responsibilities, I was thrilled for her. But as the weeks went by, the time we spent together shrank and shrank. When I tried to bring it up, she reacted by accusing me of being jealous and unsupportive. That was bad enough, but over the past year, I've noticed a change in her attitude. It's not just that she seems colder towards me. Lately, when we do spend time together, I get this almost condescending vibe. Nothing overt, just a feeling I get. With all the time I've had to myself, I've done a lot of thinking about the situation. You won't be surprised to hear that it's driven me nuts. I've been frustrated by the lack of time with her and resentful of the demands she's placed on our relationship. I still remember one evening when we were making love. We'd just finished getting comfortable in the bedroom when the phone rang. You guessed it, it was one of her real estate clients with a pressing matter she had to go deal with. Even today, that still makes me mad. But to be fair, I also remember the time I had to cancel our weekend getaway when one of my company's biggest clients passed away. So here I am, sitting at the kitchen table trying to sort things out. Maybe I'm being unfair to Fiona. Maybe I'm just jealous that other people need so much of her time. But as a network engineer, I've developed a knack for identifying problems based on seemingly insignificant symptoms. And my gut tells me there's more going on here than the factors I've considered so far. It's not just our crazy schedules that are bothering me so much. I realize that it's her attitude toward me. When she first became a councilwoman, she was eager to tell me all about what was going on with the council and the mayor's office. But now, she never mentions it anymore. Is it just because the new is worn off? Or has she decided that I'm not worth talking to? That possibility really hurts. Suddenly, a really dark thought hits me. What if she's having an affair? I immediately dismiss the nasty idea. My bunny would never cheat on me. But I can't seem to shake the thought because it seems to answer so many questions I've had. What is she really doing during all those late nights at work? She could be meeting clients, but I realize she could also be meeting a lover. Why doesn't she tell me where she's going anymore? Is it because she doesn't want to bother, or is it because she doesn't want me to know? Why is she so condescending to me whenever we're together? Has she become contemptuous of me now that I'm her unwitting cuckold? The longer I sit there thinking, the more I feel myself spiraling down into angry suspicion. I need to do something to break this train of thought before I do something stupid and irreversible. So I get up from the table and put on some old work clothes. Then I grab the lawnmower and attack our lawn until it's too dark to see anymore. The exercise helped a little. I still couldn't stop thinking about the situation, but I was calm enough to devise a plan of action. When a network starts having problems, my first step is to run some tests to figure out the cause. I needed to do the same thing with my marriage, run a diagnostic and find out what's wrong. Over a dinner of leftovers, I thought about the diagnostic tools I could use. I'm pretty familiar with a lot of the electronic wonders out there that make tracking someone pretty easy, but the more I thought about it, the harder the problem became. Sure, I could put mics and cameras around the house, but with the little time Fiona spends at home, that didn't seem likely to turn up anything useful. It's the time she's away from home that worries me. I thought about attaching a tracking device to her car, but what good would that do? Between real estate showings and city council meetings, my wife's constantly on the move, not off. Parking at hotels? She's always attending luncheons and meetings in hotel conference rooms. Miniature recording devices. Trying to tap all the phones she uses? Nothing seemed promising. I knew the answer, but I didn't want to use it because I figured it would be expensive. But hiring a professional was clearly the best approach, so I sat down at the computer and searched for private investigation firms. Ugh. That didn't help. There were a zillion of them out there. Some had ratings, but I've become pretty skeptical of online ratings and user reviews. Too easy to fake those. Is there a section of Craig's List for PI firms? Angie's List? Darn it. Then, digging deeper, I found an entry for a Channel 9 news story. When I clicked on it, I saw they'd done a piece on local detective agencies a year ago. Channel 9? Huh? I went to school with Louis Howard, the woman who's now the news director there. We even dated a few people back in college. Nothing serious, but we parted ways as friends. I gave her a call. Hey, Louis, long time no see. Could you grab a beer with me after work today? She was surprised to hear from me. I think I can manage that, Tyler. It's a slow news day, so unless something big breaks, I'll be there. When she walked into the bar, I remembered why I liked her. She was still as attractive as when we dated, but now she had the confident style of a successful professional. She looked great. We chatted for a while, catching up on mutual friends in our lives since college, but eventually I subtly changed the subject. Didn't you guys do a piece on local detective agencies a while back? She looked at me sharply. Oh, Tyler, I'm so sorry. I wonder why you didn't mention Fiona. Are you looking for a referral? Busted. I hung my head and nodded. She paused to think. With your wife's position in town, I'd steer clear of the big firms. The fact that they have more employees just increases the likelihood of someone gossiping. Does that make sense? Absolutely. And you probably don't want a one-man shop, because getting what you need in a timely manner might be a problem. The owner would probably be hard-pressed to handle more than 1 or 2 cases at a time. I nodded. That made sense too. So, if you're looking for something in between, we got good reports on the Preston agency. They're not the cheapest shop in town, but the clients we spoke with all said they were thorough, professional, and delivered results in a reasonable time frame. She paused. Tyler, the nature of PI work is a little shady, but you could do a lot worse than going with Preston. Sounded good to me, so I thanked her. But as I got up to leave, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. It was great seeing you, Tyler. I hope things work out for you. Keep me posted. I promised I would. Driving home, I thought about our conversation. Damn, that was a lot of personal marital stuff to spill. I just hoped Louis would be discreet. Her advice still made sense to me the next day, so I called the Preston agency to schedule an appointment. Luckily, the woman I spoke with told me I could meet Mr. Preston himself if I could come in early in the morning. I'll be there, I promised. For a change, Fiona came home on time that evening, and we had dinner together for the first time in days. With what I was about to do, I'd been dreading having to talk to her. But I didn't need to worry. She spent the whole evening complaining about the audacity of a businessman considering running against her in the next election. I didn't have to say or do much. The next morning, I woke up early and skipped breakfast to make sure I wouldn't be late for my appointment. After leaving a note on the message board for Fiona, I hopped in the car and drove downtown. Surprisingly, traffic was light, and I arrived earlier than expected. I double-checked the address for the Preston agency and realized it was near my favorite coffee shop, Stranger Brew. When the place opened a decade ago, there was a lot of discussion about the name and its meaning. Some believed it reflected the unique blend of their home-brewed beers. Others swore the new owner was a former hippie with a sense of humor. But Fiona checked the records at City Hall and found out that the owner's name was Yuta Stranger. Whatever the case, Stranger Brew had made it onto the major coffee chains in my view. Clearly, I wasn't the only one who liked the place. Even at that early hour, I was lucky to snag a seat when I got there. More customers kept coming in as I sat sipping my coffee and eating a breakfast sandwich. Suddenly, there was a commotion at a nearby table, and I looked up to see a large, red-faced man yelling at a young Latina woman sitting alone. "Aren't you finished yet? What gives you the right to hog a table when other people want to sit?" The young woman sat silently, clearly taken aback by the man's sudden outburst. This seemed to infuriate her accuser even more. "You're a damn Mexican, aren't you? I bet you're a damn wetback. First you come and steal our jobs, now you're taking a table at my coffee shop. Why don't you swim back home across the Rio Grande where you belong?" He reached down and swiped his hand across the table, sending her coffee spilling across the floor. Before I could even think about it, I was up and moving, stepping in between the woman and the man. "Why don't you leave her alone? She was here before you, and she has every right to that table. You need to buy her another coffee and apologize for insulting her." The man's face turned even redder, and I braced myself, expecting him to blow up at me. But his eyes suddenly shifted to something behind me, and when I looked back, I saw the owner standing there. Stranger wasn't a big guy, but he was wielding a shortened pool cue. He yelled at my opponent, "Get out of my shop, and don't come back. You have no right to bully one of my customers, and I sure as hell don't need your business." I thought the guy might still decide to start a brawl, but he looked at Yuta's pool cue, then back at me, and finally decided against it. "Fine," he yelled as he stomped out of the coffee shop. "I'm glad to go. This place sucks anyway." As the commotion died down, I turned to the trembling woman. "I'm so sorry that happened, Mom. Can I get you another cup?" The woman looked up at me sheepishly. "You don't know me, why did you do that?" I shrugged. "I don't know. I guess I hate bullies and bigots." She smiled and offered her hand. "Well, I'm Isabel Jones Alvarez, and I'm really grateful for what you did. There are a lot of people who wouldn't feel the way you do, and even fewer who would step in to help a stranger." "Nice to meet you, Isabel Jones. I'm Noah Davis, and I'm glad I could help." Just then, Yuta hurried back with 2 coffees. "A fresh cup for each of you. I'm so sorry about what happened, and I hope you'll feel comfortable coming here again in the future." We assured him we would, and then Isabel looked at me. "Would you like to have coffee with me? It'll free up your table for others. If you wouldn't mind the company, I'd be happy to join you." I sat down with her, and we started chatting while sipping from our steaming paper cups. She shook her head sadly. "I just happened to stop in. I'm starting a new job nearby, and I got here early because I didn't want to be late on my first day." She took another sip and looked at me. "You come here often?" "Not as often as I'd like. Actually, I have a meeting this morning about some personal business, and I didn't want to be late for that either." She nodded and glanced at her watch. "Actually, I should probably get going." She stood and offered her hand again. "Thanks again, Noah, for rescuing me. It was nice meeting you, and I won't forget what you did." I shook her hand and watched her walk out the door. After another sip of coffee, I decided it was time for me to go, too. Leaving the coffee shop, I started down the sidewalk toward the address of the Preston agency. Looking up, I saw Isabel walking ahead of me in the same direction. As she stopped at a traffic light, I caught up to her at the intersection. She noticed me, smiled, and nodded. After crossing the street and going a little further, she looked back and saw me still following her. A frown appeared on her face. Shoot, I didn't want her to think I was stalking her. Then, to my astonishment, she walked into the lobby of the very same building I was headed to. I purposely waited a little longer, hoping she'd be gone by the time I went in. But as I pulled open the door, I saw her standing in the lobby, arms crossed, and looking apprehensive. "Hey," she said as I hesitated to approach her, "I really appreciate what you did at the coffee shop, but that doesn't give you the right to." No, I interrupted. "I promise I'm not following you, at least not intentionally. My appointment is just in this building." She looked at me skeptically, then turned and walked toward the elevators. I followed, and when the doors opened, I stepped in, too. She pushed the button for the 4th floor and looked back at me suspiciously. "I'm going to the 4th floor," I helplessly told her. She frowned again but said nothing. I lingered as she got off at 4, but she started down the hallway in the direction of the Preston agency. As I slowly followed, she turned and frowned. Suddenly, as we neared the agency's door, a look of understanding came over her face, and her frown disappeared. She stopped in front of a door that read "Employee Entrance" and turned to me. "Good luck with your business, Noah." Now I understood. I nodded to her. Thanks. Good luck with the new job, Isabel." As I walked into the main entrance of the agency, all I could think was, shoot, I bet she knows why I'm here today. Now I have 2 people who know I need a detective. After I gave my name to the receptionist, it wasn't long before I was ushered back to the office of Bradley Preston. Okay, I didn't know how good this agency was, but at least I was getting the head honcho, so that was good. If anyone fit the name Preston, it was him. He was definitely imposing. I'm a little above average height, and when he stood up I was looking up at him. Not only that, but he had the physique of a linebacker. I felt a little intimidated. However, as we shook hands and I started explaining why I was seeing him, he quickly put me at ease with his professionalism. He skillfully guided me through a series of questions about my wife, my suspicions, her habits, and several other factors I probably wouldn't have thought of. This guy really knew his stuff. After half an hour of discussion, he leaned back in his chair. "The fact that your wife is a councilwoman actually makes the job a little easier. She's used to being in public and having people around she doesn't know. Surveillance won't be a problem." A warning bell went off in my head. Your people need to be discreet. If word gets out that I've hired someone to follow her, it could cause a major political scandal. He chuckled like a used car salesman. "Mr. Davis, we pride ourselves on our discretion and professionalism. Your wife and those around her won't even know she's being followed." I still wasn't convinced. "So what kind of techniques will you use? Audio, video, GPS tracking?" He leaned forward, crossed his arms, and stared at me with sharp eyes. "I'm not going to answer your questions because I don't want you trying to find the trackers or equipment. I've had clients mess up weeks of work when they accidentally alerted their spouses." Then he frowned. "Besides, I don't want you trying to do the surveillance yourself. You need to stick to your normal routine for the next 2 weeks and act completely normal around your wife. We're professionals, we don't need any help, and we certainly don't need any amateurs getting in the way. Am I making myself clear?" I cringed in my chair. Crystal clear. Then something else he said hit me. "You said 2 weeks. You think you can get what you need in just 2 weeks?" He relaxed and gave me one of those smiles. "You told me you've really noticed a change in your wife's behavior over the past 6 months. That suggests to me that if she is having an affair, this is the hottest phase. She'll want to see him, or her. I hadn't considered that possibility, as often as possible. At the same time, by now she's confident she'll get away with it. I fully expect we'll be able to give you a definitive answer by next Friday. At the very least, we'll be able to report to you on any suggestive behavior that needs further investigation." I couldn't help but be impressed. This man not only had the skills necessary for the job, but was also a pretty savvy student of human nature. I think I'd chosen the right diagnostic tool for this job. "Okay, I believe you. So how much is all this going to cost?" Without blinking, he quoted a number that made me wince. "I know that sounds like a lot," he continued smoothly. "But remember, we'll be using a significant number of people, vehicles, and expensive electronic equipment. More importantly, we'll give you answers. You told me how much the uncertainty is hurting you. How much is your peace of mind worth?" He had a point. I pulled out my checkbook. I found the next 2 weeks excruciating. I'd never really paid attention to myself before, so I didn't know what normal was for me. Did I look suspicious? Was I showing too much concern for my wife? Was I asking too many questions or not enough? But then I soon realized that how I acted toward her didn't matter. Fiona continued to treat me with the same level of indifference she had shown for months. When I tried to ask her about her work, she acted as though she was doing me a favor by answering. It was clear that she felt I couldn't possibly understand her work on the council anyway. I felt more like an annoyance than her husband. The following weekend, in a desperate attempt to show interest, I suggested we go out for the evening. I didn't need to bother. She immediately declined. I have open houses on Saturday and Sunday, and you know, those days always drive me crazy. Darn it, we could be living in the same house, but we were more like roommates than a married couple. What hurt me most were the memories of what our life together used to be like. We had so much in common, so many shared interests and favorite activities. I remembered sitting beside each other and talking for hours about our dreams and how we could achieve them. The most painful memories were of how passionate we used to be with each other. We'd pass each other in the hallway, and the next moment we were in bed in each other's arms, desperate to satisfy our desires. Where had all that love and passion gone? Ironically, the closer we got to achieving our dreams, the further apart we'd become. I knew I'd become wrapped up in my career, not just for the financial rewards, but because I found my work intellectually stimulating. Again, I had to ask myself, had I played any role in pushing Fiona away? But if I had, I felt Fiona was equally culpable. She'd done well as a real estate agent, but she'd always wanted more. Being elected to the council was a dream come true for her, but lately she'd been dropping hints about running for mayor. I couldn't understand why she never seemed satisfied with what she had. The more I thought about it, the more I believed our career paths had contributed to the current state of our marriage. However, even with all that stress, a little voice in my mind still warned me that something more was going on, something I wasn't seeing. Was I being paranoid, or was there a real threat out there? Much as I hated the idea of having Fiona followed, I concluded I'd done the right thing. Preston was right. Peace of mind was worth it. I basically spent 2 weeks feeling like a patient scheduled for exploratory surgery. I was terrified about what I might find out, but I couldn't wait to get it over with. Before my appointment, I stopped by Stranger Brew for my favorite coffee, the prisoner's last meal. As I sat there, I looked around, curious to see if Isabel Jones was there, but she wasn't. Luckily, the bigot I'd confronted didn't show up either. Finally, the moment arrived. I walked the 3 blocks to the Preston agency like a condemned man walking the Green Mile. While I was stating my name to the receptionist, Preston startled me by walking out and escorting me back to his office. Oh no, this couldn't be good news. He sat down and solemnly placed his hands on a file sitting on his desk, his face a mask. I couldn't stand the suspense any longer. So what's the verdict? What did you find? Instead of answering, he slid the file toward me. I think it would be better if you saw for yourself, he murmured, and my heart pounded in my chest. Shoot, shoot, shoot. I hesitantly opened the file and picked up the first photograph. My wife was standing outside a house I'd never seen, holding the door open for a young couple. In the corner of the photo was a barely visible for sale sign. I quickly grabbed the next photo. It was clearly taken from the council chamber and showed Fiona sitting in her seat at a council meeting. Below that was a photo of her chatting with Mayor Dalloway in a hallway that looked like it was in City Hall. Then there was a picture of Fiona entering her real estate office. In a daze, I quickly shuffled through the remaining photos in the file. Each one seemed perfectly innocuous, the type of activity I'd expect my wife to be engaged in. As I looked up at Preston in bewilderment, his serious face broke into a wide grin. Mr. Davis, I'm happy to report that your wife isn't cheating on you. Not only was she not sneaking off to meet a lover, but we didn't observe any behavior we considered even slightly suspicious. He leaned back in his chair and put his hands behind his head in a relaxed posture. Your wife, Mr. Davis, is many things. She's a dedicated elected official, she's a busy and successful real estate agent, and she's a woman who constantly strives to succeed. But I can assure you without hesitation that she's not an unfaithful wife. Then his face became more serious. I know you had your doubts about her, and I suspect these past 2 weeks have been particularly difficult for you. But now you can put those doubts and fears out of your head and focus on enjoying your marriage. He smiled amiably. Most of the time, my job is delivering heartbreaking news to husbands or wives about their spouses. I actually enjoy delivering good news for a change. He stood up to shake my hand. You're a lucky man, Mr. Davis. I was overjoyed. The doctor just told me that the spot on the X-ray was nothing. A wave of relief washed over me like cool water on a hot day. I shook his hand again, fumbling for words to express my gratitude. The big man smiled and reached into his desk drawer to pull out an envelope. "Here's the rest of the bill for our work. I hope you'll feel the money was well spent. If you only pay the receptionist on your way out, we'll have to send a bill to your house. I don't think you want us to do that," he chuckled. I won't use all the old clichés about walking on air. Suffice it to say, I left Preston's office in a better mood than I'd been in for a long time. At first, I simply savored the relief I felt, but soon a new thought dawned on me. I needed to get to work on repairing my marriage. I needed to show Fiona how much I loved her. I needed to stop taking her for granted. By the time I got back to the office, I had a list of things I wanted to do. Luckily, nothing was scheduled on Fiona's calendar for the weekend, so I could go all out. I started taking notes. Friday night, flowers, takeout from that little Mediterranean place Fiona loves, bubble bath, new sheets. I was going to devote this entire night to her. Saturday, breakfast in bed, spa day, more flowers, reservations at the best restaurant in town, full body oil massage followed by sex like we did when we first got married. I grinned happily. This was going to be good. As I predicted, Fiona didn't get home until 7 after her zoning committee meeting. She stumbled into the living room and flopped onto the sofa. "I'm exhausted," she groaned. "I don't know if I can even cook tonight." Suddenly her head shot up. "What's that delicious smell?" Then she looked around and noticed the vase on the coffee table. "And where did these flowers come from?" I walked over to the sofa and knelt beside her. A big smile on my face. "These beautiful flowers are for my beautiful wife, and the scent you're smelling is dinner that's been prepared and is waiting." She looked at me in surprise, then picked up the vase. "Gorgeous," she exclaimed. "Let's take these into the dining room so I can enjoy them during dinner." I hurried into the kitchen to prepare her plate, and it was ready before she was seated. Then I draped a clean napkin over her arm and showed her her favorite bottle of wine I'd chilled in the refrigerator. "Would you like a glass, ma'am?" She nodded gratefully, and as our glasses were filled, we began enjoying the meal. After a few minutes, she put down her fork. "This is wonderful. It's been a long time since you did anything like this. What do I owe this luxurious treatment to?" Then her face clouded. "Have you done something to feel guilty about?" I knew that question was coming. "Yes," I said boldly. "I've neglected you for too long. You've been working like a Trojan, holding down 2 full-time jobs while I've been so wrapped up in my work that I haven't taken the time to appreciate you. I'm a lucky man to have you as my wife, and I'm going to make sure you know I feel that way." She sat there for a moment, then her face broke into a smile. "We've really neglected each other, haven't we?" Then she looked down and pointed to the table. "Is there more?" "Absolutely," I said enthusiastically. "After dinner, I'm going to run you a bubble bath so you can soak for as long as you like to ease all those aches and pains. Then I'm going to put you to bed so you can get a good night's sleep." I grinned. "You'll need it, because I have even more plans for tomorrow." It had been a long time since I'd seen her laugh like that. Later, as she slipped under the covers after her bath, she looked at me in surprise. "Are these sheets new?" she wanted to know as she ran her fingers across the pillowcase. "The best cotton with the highest thread count I could find," I told her smugly. "Now lie down and enjoy sweet dreams." She gave another grateful smile and closed her eyes as I turned off the lights and closed the bedroom door. When I got to her a few hours later, she hadn't even stirred. She was still asleep the next morning when I came in with a tray laden with Eggs Benedict, crispy potatoes, and a mimosa. "Don't dawdle," I warned her. "You have a spa appointment at 10. She shook her head in amazement. "You're spoiling me, you know." "I hope so. You deserve it." "Oh, and after you're done at the spa, why don't you run over to the mall and see if there's something you want to wear to Il Ferrantino tonight?" She was beaming as I walked downstairs. Dinner that night was extraordinary. Fiona had actually found a new dress to wear, and when I saw it, I knew I was in for a treat. As the waiter brought out the bottle of Prosecco I'd ordered, I raised my glass in a toast to her. To the beautiful woman who made me the luckiest man in the world. She took a sip and tilted her head quizzically. "Are you sure you've done nothing wrong, Tyler? You haven't got a mistress somewhere out there?" I felt a pang because I had suspected her of that. "Absolutely not, Bunny. First of all, I take my wedding vows very, very seriously. Second, I could never find anyone who's more attractive to me than you." I took another sip of wine. "And I know that you would never do that to me, either." "Never," she said, raising her glass to toast me. Our dinner was wonderful, but we skipped dessert so we wouldn't be too full for what was to come. We'd finished the second bottle of wine, and we were both giggling as we walked hand in hand up the stairs. When we got to the bedroom, she turned to me and said playfully, "So what's next, my darling husband?" I placed my finger on her lips and began carefully unfastening her new dress, followed by her push-up bra, bikini panties, and thigh-high stockings. After removing her high heels, I pulled the covers off the bed and helped her lie down on her stomach. Her cute bottom jiggled invitingly. After hastily removing my own clothes, I grabbed a bottle of fragrant massage oil I'd bought while she was out and sat on her naked body. Carefully warming the oil in my hands first, I began rubbing the oil into her skin, starting with her neck and shoulders. She moaned with pleasure as I focused on her muscles. I took my time, massaging her back, and it was clear she was enjoying what I was doing by the sounds she made. After using my thumbs to massage the muscles at the base of her spine, I moved to her buttocks and began massaging her legs. When I reached her feet, I made sure to use extra oil and take my time. With the amount of time she spent on her feet during the day, I thought she'd really appreciate that. However, eventually I started moving back up her legs and felt a thrill as she spread her legs wide to give me access. Despite the invitation, I went straight down to her buttocks and began massaging both cheeks. Immediately she started to grind her hips, and now I could smell her arousal. "Turn over," I murmured authoritatively, and she rolled onto her back, closing her eyes to concentrate on the sensations I was bringing her. I added more oil and repeated the process I'd done on her back, starting with her arms and shoulders. Then I worked my way down her sides to her hips and moved on to her stomach and lower abdomen. I could tell she was disappointed that I'd skipped her breasts, but when she reached for them, I gently stopped her. Next, I made a quick pass down the outside of her legs, followed by a slower journey up the inside of her thighs toward her core. She moaned louder and started grinding her hips again. But again I teased her by rubbing the oil back onto my hands and making a circular motion around her. As her cries became more urgent, I slid down and started running my fingers up and down her inner thighs. Immediately, she bent her legs at the knees and raised them in a classic woman's surrendering pose. I leaned forward, then suddenly dove down for a mouth massage, bringing my fingers up and gently touching her inner labia. Even with the sensations my tongue was causing, she was still feeling and moaning. Between the massage oil on my fingers and the lubricating fluids flowing out, I could easily slide inside. I gently explored the warm folds of her inner passage, moving deeper. Then I rotated my hand and began probing a small, rough spot at the front that I knew was there. She moaned loudly, confirming that I'd found my target. It was like an electric current running through her body. Her hips jerked and began to pump in rhythm with my tongue. Now she was screaming again, so loud it was almost painful. Her voice grew higher and higher, and suddenly her whole body convulsed. Then she collapsed onto the bed, but the aftershocks continued to ripple through her hips. I stayed still for a minute or two, feeling her breath return to normal in her body. When I thought the moment was ripe, I resumed, licking gently, barely touching her, feeling the warmth radiating from inside. "Ooh," she moaned as the sensations began to build. I slowly repeated the escalating process, and her body responded, trembling as I touched. I tried to be as patient as I could, but my own desire was reaching its peak, and I needed release. Accordingly, I accelerated what I was doing, and was relieved to hear her respond as I hoped. As I probed and stroked, her knees lifted and then she stretched her legs toward the ceiling. "Please don't stop. You have to make love to me now," she begged, pulling my head up to pull me into position. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. I knelt and used my hand to guide my penis into her vaginal entrance. "Please," she sobbed as I paused at her entrance, and I slid all the way into her without stopping. We both collapsed, and after a minute I rolled off her and lay on my back, gasping for breath. Then I pulled the covers up over us, and we immediately fell asleep. We both slept so late that we skipped breakfast and ended up going out for a late brunch. I purposely didn't plan anything special for Sunday, because I wanted us to have a normal day. After our late brunch, we returned home and did our usual weekend chores. Fiona went to the grocery store to restock the refrigerator, while I mowed the lawn. That afternoon I turned on my computer to check emails, while Fiona went out to show a house to a potential buyer who'd called about one of her listings. Everything was normal and happy, just like our lives used to be. I was in a great mood driving to work Monday morning. Project Woo the Wife had gone flawlessly. I felt closer to Fiona than I had in months, and I was pretty sure she felt the same way. I even left a special note on our message board, sweet cookies, sweeter bunny. Bunny, you make my life complete. Pretty cheesy, I know, but I genuinely felt that way at the moment. Work went smoothly, and I made an effort to leave on time to be sure to be there to greet Fiona. When I heard the garage door open, I stood up expectantly and smiled as she walked toward me. Hoo. She slapped me across the face as hard as she could, knocking me backward, my ears ringing. What the heck? I yelled. You bastard, she screamed at me. You were following me. You hired a detective agency to track me, to take pictures of my every move. You didn't trust me. Oh boy, this was not good. She stood there with her fists clenched at her sides, her face flushed with anger. I can't believe you would be so disrespectful to me. Do you know how humiliating it is to know your husband doesn't trust you? She paused to catch her breath. Okay, what do you have to say for yourself? What could I say? She was absolutely right, I hadn't trusted her. I'd had her followed. How could I possibly make this right? I just stood there like an idiot, desperately trying to think of something that could salvage the situation. But I do trust you, Bunny. I know you've been faithful, honest. Sure, after you had me followed for 2 weeks. Her face contorted even more. And don't ever call me Bunny again. I could only stare stupidly at the floor. My silence fueled her anger. I guess I was right after all about this weekend. You were only sweet to me because you felt guilty about what you did. No, Fiona, that's not true, I said, but she cut me off. Oh, if you don't feel guilty, then you certainly should. Angry tears streamed down her face as she glared at me. I have never been treated so badly in my life. And it was my own husband who did it. She spun around and headed for the stairs. Right now I can't even stand to look at you. With that, she stomped up the stairs, and I heard the door to our bedroom slam shut. I slumped onto a chair, my head in my hands. This was awful. This was the worst. What could I say? What could I do to make it up to her? I stood up and started pacing the room, my mind also spinning. I didn't think flowers or candy would work. Right now, I didn't think there was any gift I could give her at any price to win her back. Price? Oh, damn, what if she found out how much I'd paid Preston? She'd really be furious then. My jaw started to ache, so I went into the kitchen and grabbed some ice in a plastic bag. I deserved this. Heck, I deserved much worse. Then an even worse thought hit me. What if she wanted a divorce? I really couldn't blame her. Why had I let my paranoia control me? I heard her moving upstairs and wondered what she was doing. After a while, she came downstairs and grabbed her purse. Looking at me with venomous eyes, she spat, "I don't want to live in the same house with you," then headed for the door. I hurried after her. "Will you come back?" "I haven't decided yet." With that, she went to her car and drove away, tires squealing. I stood there helplessly for a minute, then decided to go upstairs to see what she'd done up there. At first glance, our bedroom looked normal. But when I caught sight of the living room out of the corner of my eye, I understood. She had pulled all my clothes out of the closet and tossed them haphazardly onto the guest bed. Everything I had stored in my dresser drawers had been thrown messily onto the living room floor. I sighed and started picking up the clothes and putting them away in the living room. I guessed I'd be sleeping here for the foreseeable future. At least she hadn't kicked me out of the house. I wasn't very hungry, but I forced myself to eat some leftovers while I waited for her to come home. The later it got, the hungrier I became, and I finally gave up and went to bed. A while later, I woke up to the sound of footsteps on the stairs. I sat up in bed to watch her walk past. A moment later, the bedroom door slammed shut, and I heard the lock click. I slumped back onto the pillow in despair. After a restless night, I got up early and used the guest bathroom to shower and shave. When I was finished, I quietly tried the handle of the main bedroom door. But no surprise, it was still locked. Downstairs, I made myself a cup of coffee, but I didn't feel like eating, so I skipped breakfast. Before leaving for work, I glanced up and saw our message board. I picked up the chalk and wrote, "I'm so sorry, Fiona. Can we talk?" I had a lot more I wanted to say, but I stopped there. Luckily, there weren't any major problems at the office, because I would have been useless trying to deal with them. All I could think about was how to explain what I'd done without making things worse. "Honey, I love you, but I suspected you were cheating on me." Maybe not the right approach. How about, now that I've thoroughly checked you out, I trust you again. Yeah, that'll make her feel better. After agonizing over it all day, I finally decided to tell her the truth. "Honey, I was afraid we were growing apart, and I let my paranoia override my reason. That had the advantage of honesty, and if I coupled it with a sincere apology, maybe it would work. I left the office a little early, intending to throw myself at the mercy of the marital court when she got home. But my hopes were dashed when I walked past the kitchen and saw the message board. My plea had been erased, and in its place was a message in all caps, "Joe to hell." Didn't sound too promising. Still, I set about cooking a nice dinner for both of us. Maybe we could talk while we ate. 2 hours later, the folly of that plan became clear as I sat alone at the table. Admitting defeat, I ate my dinner and put hers in the refrigerator. I'd just finished watching the late-night news when she came home. As she headed for the stairs, I couldn't restrain myself. "I've been worried about you, Fiona. I didn't know where you were." She stared at me with eyes like flint. "Why didn't you call your private investigator for a report?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Then she went upstairs and I heard the bedroom door slam shut. All I could do was groan. That night marked a turning point in our relationship. We were in a cold war, and there were no negotiations. She came and went as she pleased, and I knew nothing about her schedule. We didn't go anywhere or do anything together. I felt certain she would divorce me, and I became wary whenever a stranger approached me. But, thankfully, the papers never came. Over time, I noticed if not a warming, then at least a gradual shift in our relationship. Her anger toward me slowly subsided into indifference. She continued to speak to me, but only about mundane needs. Garbage pickup is tomorrow, or is there any mail for me? But she utterly refused to discuss our situation, and the door to the master bedroom remained shut. Lying in bed at night, my thoughts shifted from one emotion to another, like those annoying looping GIF images you see on the web. I'd start with feeling angry and defensive about her treatment. How long would she continue like this? It wasn't as if I'd done anything to harm her. It was unfair of her to shut me out like this. But just as quickly, I'd shift to remorse. "It's all your fault, Noah. Think how angry you'd be if she'd done the same thing to you. How long would it take you to get over it?" Then I'd swing back to anger. Above all, I felt a deep, gnawing pain. I missed my wife. I missed the physical and emotional intimacy we used to share. My goal had been to bring us closer together, and all I'd achieved was pushing us further apart. I couldn't stop remembering the wonderful weekend we'd shared right before things went bad, and I found myself mourning our loss. People around me began to notice my depression, but their questions and concern only made things worse. The last thing I wanted to do was discuss what I'd done. I had no doubt about the reaction I'd get, especially from my female friends. They'd be furious about what I'd done. Worse still, my use of a detective to follow Fiona, if this ever came out, could generate gossip. It could be used against her in a campaign. If I damaged Fiona's political future, that would surely be the end of us. I felt trapped in a no-win situation. I was truly suffering, but there was no one I could talk to about it. Now I knew what purgatory must be like. I went for a long hike in the woods one Sunday, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. After following the trail for an hour, I came to a small clearing and sat down on a log to rest. The serenity of the scene contrasted sharply with the turmoil inside me. I couldn't go on like this. I loved Fiona, but we didn't have a marriage anymore. It wasn't fair to me, and it wasn't fair to her, to continue like this. We both played a part, but I bore the lion's share of the responsibility. Our marriage was dead, and I was the one who killed it. Strangely, as I came to that conclusion, a sense of relief washed over me. I took a deep breath and looked around at the sky, the trees and the clearing. It was beautiful here. I wished Fiona could see this with me. Then I realized what I just thought, and the bitter taste of failure filled my mouth. After finishing work the following Monday, I searched for and found a family law firm that advertised a non-confrontational approach to dissolving marriages in a respectful environment. That appealed to me. If our marriage couldn't be saved, I wanted to end it as amicably as possible. I called and scheduled an appointment for the end of the week. I just hung up when the phone rang again. "Is this Noah Davis?" a hesitant voice asked, sounding vaguely familiar. "Yes, who's calling, please?" "This is Isabel Jones Alvarez. I don't know if you remember me, but we met at Stranger Brew and—" The damsel in distress, of course. "I remember you, Isabel Jones. What can I do for you?" "I need to talk to you about something very important." Okay, I guess I can manage that. What do you need to talk to me about?" No, this is something I need to discuss in person." "What is this? Some kind of shakedown?" She didn't seem like that type, but still, I really don't understand. If you could explain. "Please, Noah, I need to see you right away. if possible. I could come to your office if that would help. I started to refuse her, but there was something in her tone and the whole situation that made me curious. Still, better to be cautious, pick somewhere public. No, my office isn't good. How about this? I can be at Stranger Brew in 15 minutes. Would that work? Yes, that's perfect. I'll see you there. Thank you. What had I gotten myself into? But she had genuinely seemed like a nice person before, and the urgency in her voice got my attention. I put away my work and started walking toward the coffee shop. When I got there, she was already sitting at a back table waiting. She stood up and shook my hand as I approached, then ordered me my favorite coffee. I took a sip, trying to figure out the best way to start. I decided to make small talk first. So, how's that job at Preston Investigations going? Her face fell. Not so good, I got fired yesterday. Fired? What happened? I'll tell you later. First, I want to ask you, how are things going with your wife? I was stunned. How did she know about Fiona and me? Then I slapped myself mentally. Of course, she knew. She saw me go into the agency. Heck, she was probably part of the team that was following Fiona. At that moment, all my troubles flooded back into my mind, and I felt my depression returning. I leaned back in my chair and shook my head. They're not good at all. Somehow Fiona found out I'd had her followed, and she went ballistic. Then, unexpectedly, all my pain and sorrow poured out, and I told this near stranger the story I'd kept bottled up for so long. She watched me impassively as I recounted my misery. When I finished, she tilted her head to one side and asked, "When you saw Mr. Preston, did he show you the surveillance photos?" Yes, of course. Why? What did the photos show? I was puzzled. They were just pictures of Fiona doing her usual work, meeting with home buyers, attending council meetings, working in her office. Everything was perfectly normal, perfectly innocent. Why? She leaned toward me, her face grim. Noah, yesterday morning at the agency, I needed to copy some documents. When I got to the copy machine, I saw your case file sitting there. She blushed slightly. I shouldn't have touched it, but I remembered how kind you'd been to me, and I was curious, so I looked inside. I saw the photos you just described, Noah, but there were other photos, too. Photos that Preston obviously didn't show you. Noah, I saw several pictures of your wife in the arms of another man. These were private photos of them having sex. What? That's impossible. Preston assured me that. It's more than that, Noah. There are different dates and times on the photos. This isn't a one-time lapse. Your wife is having an affair with this man. I couldn't believe it. You must be mistaken. It can't be Fiona. Why would Preston lie to me? I don't know, Noah, but when he caught me with your file, he flew into a rage and fired me on the spot. Why would he react like that if he didn't have something to hide? Do you have copies of any of the photos? I need to see them myself. No, I'm sorry. I didn't have time to make copies. I looked at her closely. Are you sure you're not making this up just to get revenge on Preston for firing you? Immediately, I saw the hurt in her eyes. Of course I'm angry at Preston, but I would never use you to get revenge. You've been so good to me. You stood up for me even though you didn't know me. I could never repay your kindness in such a cruel way. There were tears welling up in her eyes. Maybe she was a fantastic actress, but I dismissed that thought immediately. She wasn't lying to me. Still, I was having trouble grasping the implications of what she was saying. Okay, then who is that other man in the picture? She shook her head. I don't know. I don't recognize him. I was about to say something else, but she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Noah, there's a lot I don't understand, but I think I know one possible reason why Preston would lie to you. Your wife is powerful in this city. I believe Preston is blackmailing her. That stopped me cold. There were plenty of others in town who would gladly use a scandal to bring Fiona down in the next election. Ambitious though she was, she'd do almost anything to avoid such a humiliating expose. Without thinking, I rubbed my jaw where Fiona had slapped me. Had she been lying to me all this time? Had she been treating me like dirt and then laughing about it with her lover? The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I stood up, walked outside, and started pacing the sidewalk. Marie Jones ran after me and grabbed my arm. Noah, where are you going? I'm going to see Preston right now and find out what's really going on. Wait, Noah. Stop and think about this. If I'm right, Preston will only be lying to you because it's the only way he can maintain leverage over your wife. Besides, by now he's almost certainly deleted those photos from your file and hidden them. You won't get anything from him." She saw me hesitate and quickly continued, "And the same thing will happen if you confront Fiona. Do you really think she'll admit to anything?" She pulled me down onto a park bench. "If you confront them about what I've told you, they'll both say I'm just a disgruntled employee. It'll be my word against theirs." She looked me in the eye seriously. "No, I swear to you I'm telling the truth. I hope you believe that." I looked at her face and into my gut. She wasn't lying, she was trying to repay someone who had helped her. "I believe you, Isabel Jones?" I saw relief mixed with gratitude on her face, but then she became more determined. "There's something else, Noah. There's a reason I wanted to see you right away. I discovered something else important yesterday. I looked at Preston's calendar. He has a meeting with your wife in half an hour. If you're willing to do a little tailing, maybe we can figure out what he's up to." "Yes, absolutely. Do you know where they're meeting?" I wrote it down. She handed me a slip of paper with an address in the suburbs. 2232 Magnolia Lane, why out there? I grumbled, more to myself than to her. "That's a residential area." I shrugged, I'd figure it out later. "Come on," I said, my car's parked nearby. We were soon driving to the address Isabel Jones had given me. I didn't say anything, but inside I was a volcano. I felt incredibly guilty for not trusting my wife, and now it seemed I had good reason to suspect her all along. The bitch. And who was her secret lover? How long had this affair been going on? For that matter, how was Preston involved? "Slow down," I told myself. "Wait until you know for sure that Fiona's cheating on you. Rushing to conclusions is what got you into trouble before." That's true, but that was because Preston lied to me. It was hard to keep myself under control. There it is. Isabel Jones exclaimed as I blindly drove past the address. I drove another block, turned, and then backtracked, parking on the street 2 doors down. Damn, this is a really nice neighborhood. Whose house is this? I wondered, mostly to myself. Then, as we got closer to the house, I saw something I'd missed before, a for sale sign from my wife's real estate brokerage. Suddenly, everything became clear. That's why they're meeting here. This house is vacant, I said to Isabel Jones in a low but urgent voice. The owner's moved out, and she's been trying to sell it for months. We stayed behind a large privet hedge surrounding the property and made our way to the side driveway. 2 cars were parked there. I didn't recognize either one. "You stay here. I'll go around and see if I can spot them," I whispered. "I'm coming too," she replied fiercely, and I shrugged. Together, we slowly made our way towards the side of the house, staying out of sight behind the hedge. We could hear murmuring coming from the back of the house, and as we crept closer, we discovered a set of French doors open into what must have been a den. We both peered inside, and my adrenaline started pumping. There was Fiona, in lingerie I'd never seen before, sprawled on a chaise lounge talking to someone we couldn't see because of the angle. Her fingers were toying with the bottom of her tiny black panties. I gritted my teeth. She was getting herself worked up. Suddenly a figure appeared, and I could only remain silent. Bradley Preston walked into the room, sporting only a smile. I knew he was a big man. Now I knew he was big all over, very big. Fiona sat up, her fingers trailing as she looked at him longingly. She spread her legs in a gesture as old as time. "Here I am, come and get me." But instead of going to her, Preston casually walked to a chaise lounge, plopped down, and stretched out his legs. He grinned, and I could actually hear what he said. "Why don't you show him how much you love it, sweetheart?" Fiona slid the top of her bra-covered breasts up his leg until she was close enough. Then she started worshipping him, kissing it. Preston put his hands behind his head and leaned back, enjoying her attentions. I grabbed Isabel Jones' arm and signaled for her to retreat back to the street. I'd never been so angry in my life. "That bitch," I hissed once we were out of earshot. "If he's blackmailing her, she certainly doesn't seem too upset about it." "Aren't we going to take pictures?" she asked. I thought for a moment, then smiled. "Oh yes, we'll take plenty of pictures. And maybe we can get some others involved too." I hurried over to Fiona's for sale sign, yanked it out of the ground, and tossed it over the hedge where it wouldn't be easily seen. Then I pulled out my cell phone and dialed 911. "I want to report a residential burglary." I was walking through the neighborhood and saw 2 people breaking into 2232 Magnolia Lane. "Yes, they're inside, probably robbing the place. If you're quick, you might catch them before they escape." I hung up without giving my name while Isabel Jones stared at me in bewilderment. But I ignored her and called my friend at Channel 9. "Hey, Louis, you guys are still running that story about the series of house burglaries, right? Well, I've got a hot tip for you. There's a BE in progress at 2232 Magnolia Lane. The police have been alerted and are on their way. If you get here fast enough, you might beat your competition and get some great footage." "That's right, 2232 Magnolia Lane. No problem, I owe you one." "What did you do?" my companion asked, but I waved her question away. "Let's go back and get those pictures." When we returned to the French doors, Fiona was still kneeling and worshipping Mount Preston. I could clearly hear her moaning in the way she always did when really aroused. Preston reached down and pulled her up enough to reach behind and unclasp her bra. Once that was done, he pinched her nipples, and she moaned in a mixture of pain and pleasure. Then, to our astonishment, another naked man appeared from somewhere in the house. As Fiona bent over and writhed on Preston's body, the second man came up behind her and started fondling her as well. Isabel Jones grabbed my arm. "That's the man in the pictures," she whispered. "Do you know who he is?" I nodded angrily. "Oh, yes, I know him. Fiona introduced him to me at one of her political receptions. It's none other than Oscar Harper, head of the zoning board in our fair city." The flustered policeman was attempting to pull Fiona's panties down her legs. As he struggled, I couldn't help but notice he was far less endowed than the massive detective. What a pathetic wimp. I thought, wondering why my wife was sleeping with him. But before I could think more on the question, he succeeded in yanking the flimsy garment off. As soon as she was free, Fiona moved up frantically trying to impale herself on Preston. Almost instantly, I began to hear the familiar passionate yelps rising from deep within her throat. Now that the last barrier was removed, Oscar bent over behind her and started working his penis into Fiona's other hole. He's about to DP her. I realized in astonishment. She never let me get near that. Suddenly, Isabel pulled me away from the door and pointed down the driveway where a patrol car had just pulled up. We ran toward them together. "We just saw them, officers," I gasped. "They're still inside. If you're quick, you might catch them." The older patrol officer looked at his partner. "There are 2 cars parked in the driveway, and I don't see any signs of a break-in." Then he looked at me suspiciously. "Are you sure there's a crime in progress?" Just then, the Channel 9 news van pulled up to the street, and a reporter and cameraman rushed out to join us. "What's going on? Are we going to get some action shots?" The first officer began to speak when we heard it, a loud, womanly scream that seemed to tremble at the peak, before changing into a pained moan. "Oh my God," I yelled, "he's killing her!" The 2 officers looked at each other in alarm. Then Fiona screamed again, this time even louder. "Let's go." The first officer yelled, drawing his pistol and sprinting toward the front door. With the younger officer hot on his heels, both burst through the front door and disappeared inside. "Start rolling," the reporter yelled to his associate. Then he turned his back to the house and started speaking rapidly into the camera. "Behind me is the house at 2232 Magnolia Lane, where police are investigating a suspected burglary and break-in. We just heard a series of loud screams coming from inside the house, and officers have entered to investigate." As he finished his sentence, a terrifying commotion began erupting from inside the house. To me, it sounded like a melee out of a period drama, except this was real life. People were yelling, and we heard things crashing and glass breaking. The cameraman focused on the house just in time to see the chief of police running out the front door, stark naked. Right behind him was my wife, similarly attired. "Wait for me," she screamed as Oscar yanked open the door of one of the cars and started the engine. As soon as she got inside, he put the car in reverse. Then he slammed on the brakes just in time to avoid hitting the patrol car parked at the end of the driveway. In desperation, Harper shifted gears and gunned the engine. Then he jerked the wheel, cutting huge gouges in the lawn and attempting to ram through the privet hedge. He almost made it, but the thick branches slowed the car and lifted the rear axle high enough that the tires could only spin uselessly in the air. The reporter recognized the 2 politicians instantly. He signaled to his cameraman and then hurried toward the stalled car. "Commissioner Harper, Councilwoman Davis, can you explain to our viewers what you 2 were doing in this house? Oh, and where are your clothes?" The police officer refused to talk to him, and when the reporter persisted, Oscar rolled up the window. As the camera continued to roll, the 2 inside did their best to cover their naked bodies with their hands and arms, all the while yelling angrily at each other. Then the cameraman looked up and focused on the house again. The naked, hunched-over figure of Bradley Preston appeared, his hands cuffed behind his back, blood dripping from multiple cuts. The two officers escorting him out also appeared a bit worse for wear. "Who is that?" the reporter asked in confusion. "That's Bradley Preston, the president of Preston Investigations," Isabel Jones spoke up. "He's a private investigator." The reporter recorded the name but remained confused. "And who are you?" he asked Isabel Jones. "We need to go home, sweetheart," I said firmly, taking her arm and guiding her toward my car. As we drove away, we saw the police attempting to shoo away the neighbors who were coming out to stare. Over the next few days, the news became the talk of the town. Channel 9 used their footage to create a promotional spot for their evening newscast, so the actual action footage of the chief of police, the councilwoman, and the detective, their genitals digitally obscured, was played over and over. The story was so compelling that the national affiliate of Channel 9 picked it up, and it became the national evening news. Soon, there were very few places in the country where people hadn't seen most of the glorious footage of my wife running across the lawn. Preston, naturally, was immediately jailed for aggravated assault on a police officer. As he was being moved to his cell, he made some thoughtless comments about the two officers and what he intended to do to them as soon as he was released. The presiding judge did not appreciate Preston's comments and denied bail. The police had a tougher time determining whether any crimes had been committed by the commissioner and councilwoman. The burglary and break-in were quickly ruled out, and knowing Fiona was the listing agent for 2232 Magnolia Lane, even the trespassing charges were dropped. However, the excessive publicity forced both of them into hiding. The morning paper was furious about being scooped on this scandal, and the editor assigned everyone on the city desk to find out what really happened. "Commissioner and councilwoman, politics makes for strange bedfellows" was the sensational headline the following day. I had assumed that the whole affair was about sex, but I was wrong. A tenacious newspaper reporter went digging and uncovered evidence of bribery related to some local development projects. It turned out the councilwoman had been soliciting bribes from developers, and the commissioner had engineered favorable zoning variances in exchange for the councilwoman's sexual favors. It seems these two didn't hide deep enough, because when the story broke, they were quickly apprehended and charged with obstruction of justice. The first thing I did when I got back to the office from Magnolia Lane was to call the law firm I had contacted and cancel the appointment. Oh, the kind woman I'd spoken with asked hopefully, "Does this mean you and your wife have reconciled?" "It means I don't want an amicable split anymore," I said coldly. "I'm going to hire a shark and take her to the cleaners." I guess being dragged into this mess was inevitable, at least initially. The police conducted numerous interviews with me, trying to determine if I had been involved in or benefited from my wife's little scheme. Luckily, Fiona kept all her money in a separate account under only her name, and when I told the lieutenant about hiring Preston to investigate my wife, he just shook his head sympathetically at me. My friends and colleagues were also sympathetic, but none of them could quite figure out what to say to me. We all loved Fiona and were so sorry to hear she turned out to be a deceitful politician and a cheating whore. Didn't quite work. Neither did, so sorry you got cuckolded. Eventually, most of them avoided me, and I couldn't really blame them. I hired a really good lawyer to handle my divorce, although that turned out to be overkill. Between Fiona's public infidelity and the possibility of jail time, there was never going to be any question of getting a contested divorce. But my lawyer did make sure that Fiona took the biggest financial hit. I thought I was done with her, but surprisingly, I had one more encounter with my soon-to-be ex-wife. I received a call from Fiona's lawyer. She wanted me to be a character witness for Fiona. I laughed out loud at the idea, but my laughter died when the lawyer told me she was planning to subpoena me if I refused to cooperate. The idea of being dragged back into Fiona's mess wasn't appealing, and I considered refusing. But then her lawyer said she wanted to interview me before trial, and Fiona would be present. On impulse, I decided to agree if Fiona answered a few questions for me. I was happy she agreed. Maybe now I could finally get some answers. When I entered the conference room at the lawyer's office, Fiona was already there with her. She was wearing one of those power suits she liked to wear for council meetings when she knew there would be TV cameras around. I had to admit, she still looked good. But when I looked at her face, I could clearly see that the stress had taken its toll on her. Mr. Davis, Fiona's lawyer began, I understand your marriage will soon be dissolving under rather challenging circumstances. We're not here to discuss that. What we're trying to do is demonstrate that, prior to Ms. Davis being led astray by the allurements of others, she was a loving wife and a dedicated, upstanding citizen of good character. We want to call you as a witness and have you testify to your shared life before the unfortunate events of recent months. Led astray by the allurements of others, I thought sarcastically. Yeah, that's one way to put it. But I restrained myself and looked at the lawyer calmly. When I married my wife, I thought she was the most fascinating and exciting woman I'd ever met. She was intelligent, she was funny, and she had a way of putting people at ease that made them want to be around her. The lawyer nodded rapidly at Fiona and then turned back to me with an encouraging smile. She was recording my every word. For the first 6 years of our marriage, Fiona and I shared common goals and dreams, and I felt we were on the path to achieving them. The lawyer interrupted. You mean first 8 years, don't you, Mr. Davis? I believe you were married for 8 years. I ignored her and continued, but since she was elected to the city council, my wife changed. She became ambitious, manipulative, self-absorbed, and focused only on her own goals. She increasingly neglected me and our marriage to pursue her own advancement. It was her escalating indifference and disdain towards me that prompted me to hire a private investigator. No, Mr. Davis, that's not what we want. You need to. Don't bother, Virginia, Fiona interrupted. I told you this was a long shot. He'll never help me. Then she looked at me bitterly. So why are you here today, Tyler? What do you want? I folded my arms and leaned across the table toward her. I want 30 minutes alone with you to ask you some questions. Will you help me if I do? Not a chance in hell. She looked at me for a few seconds, then sighed and leaned back in her chair. Fine, I guess I owe you that much. You can have 30 minutes. Are you sure? Fiona's lawyer asked. It's all right. He won't hurt me. Shaking her head, the lawyer left the room, closing the conference room door behind her. Fiona turned to look at me. Okay, Tyler, what do you want to ask? I had a lot of questions, but I decided to start with the most fundamental one. Why, Fiona? Why did you do it? Suddenly she shot upright, and her eyes flashed fire. It's all your fault, you know. I wouldn't be in this mess if you hadn't hired a detective to follow me. I was taken aback. My fault? How could it possibly be my fault? You're the one. But she was too angry to hear me. Everything was going so well until that bastard showed up at my office with those pictures of Oscar and me. And it was you who incited him to attack me. I was furious with you when I found out. I wouldn't have had to do that if you hadn't been sleeping with Harper. She scoffed. That wasn't an affair, that was politics. Oscar is a lousy lover and he's smaller than you are. I only seduced him because he could help me get the zoning variance I wanted. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Why did you need the zoning variance? You're not a developer. She shook her head as if I were the slowest kid in her class. I didn't need the variance, but the big developers did, and I needed their support to run for mayor. Like I said, it was all about politics. So it was just about political support, right? Then why did the police find over $1 million in your secret bank account? She actually gave me a sheepish smile. Okay, maybe it was about the money, too. Then her expression shifted back to anger. But none of this would matter if you hadn't been such a busybody. I wasn't going to let her trap me into that. What about Preston? What did he want? Half of what I got, and half of what Oscar got. Wait, you said Oscar only got involved because you seduced him. Her face took on a strange expression. Like I said, Preston wanted half of what Oscar got. And after the first time he got it, I discovered that he's far superior to Oscar, a vastly superior one. I suddenly recalled the sight of Fiona kneeling at Preston's feet, orally servicing his enormous endowment, and I felt disgusted. So he didn't need to coerce you. She gave me a sly smile. Only the first time. After that, I was happy to oblige. She saw my expression and giggled. We all have our own sexual preferences. I'm just lucky to have discovered mine. Sounds like you're not exactly upset I hired Preston, I said sarcastically. She corrected me with a lazy smile. No, actually, I think I owe you one for that. Then her smile vanished. And things would have been fine if it hadn't been for those nosy neighbors on Magnolia Lane. If they hadn't called the police, I wouldn't be in this mess. For the first time that day, I felt rather superior. I stood up and smiled at my darling wife. Actually, it wasn't the neighbors. I was the one who called the police, and I was the one who called Channel 9. You did all that? You bastard. She stood up so quickly she knocked over the chair she was sitting on. She grabbed a law book from the shelf behind her and threw it across the table at me. She was about to climb over the table to try and reach me when her lawyer rushed in and grabbed her arm. Calm down, Fiona, calm down. You can't do this. I'm sorry, I can't be a character witness for your client. Counselor, I said as I walked out the door behind me. Then I turned back. Enjoy your time in jail, Bunny. Ultimately, Preston pled guilty to a lesser charge than assaulting a police officer in exchange for testifying about the bribery conspiracy. Besides jail time, he of course lost his PI license. Harper got a reduced sentence because he didn't actually take the money. But he lost his job, his wife, and his dignity, and never reappeared in town. I decided the pencil-necked geek got what he deserved. I deliberately avoided any news about Fiona's trial, partly because I didn't care what happened to her, and partly because I wanted to be able to plead ignorance if anyone asked. But when I was at the Stranger Brew some time later, I happened to see a newspaper with the story of her sentencing. I couldn't resist reading it. Fiona received a 3 to 5 year prison sentence, I learned, plus a $25,000 fine for illegal campaign contributions. I was also pleased to discover that she was now facing federal charges for income tax evasion on her personal slush fund. Apparently, the state's seizure of her ill-gotten gains didn't constitute a mitigating circumstance for the feds. I rubbed my chin. Good, exactly what she deserved. Maybe now I could get on with my life. Just then, my train of thought was interrupted by a voice I hadn't heard in a long time. Hey, stranger, buy a girl a beer. I smiled at her. My pleasure, Isabel Jones.